Listen, I don't think, if you're a senior in high school right now, you're potentially getting double whammy. You're going to might show up on a team that has transfers and returnees, and, you're missing your prom, you're missing your season. And, it's painful. I think it's probably more painful than for a college guy. A college guy's 22. He's mature. He's more fully formed. And listen, I feel for my guys. I wish they were all coming back. I want, that was our whole thing. Our whole mantra at Harvard was, let's find out how good we can be. And, you'll win some of them, you'll lose some that you were really good at, right? So not being able to find that out is crushing. And I miss our guys, I think, but I think it might be more painful for a high school guy. He's 17, 18 years old, and you're not as fully formed yet. And so you're going to struggle with that. So, my advice for, the seniors that are going on to play is you need to continue to be a great leader on the team that you're still on. Even though your team is not competing, you're probably still doing workouts and Zoom meetings and doing some culture building and leadership stuff, is to be really, really engaged in that, because there's huge value. And they'll remember that much longer than the great goal you scored earlier in the season. They'll remember how you treated them, how you spoke to them, how you mentored them, and how you're preparing for your opportunity next fall. Are you still wallowing, or are you leading by owning today and managing today and doing that into the future? I think there's real value in that. As far, and those guys also have to prepare for their college season. So, my advice for guys is you can't wallow in it much longer. We're all sad, but you have to kind of manage today. And there's nobody looking over your shoulder. You can actually lie on Zoom that you did your workouts. Nobody's going to know, but you'll know, and it'll be found out eventually, when you get to a summer tournament or some tournament where you're all together. So, I think the fact that young guys have to learn how to have conversations again with their parents and their siblings, and they're back in the home team, I think that's a great thing. The fact that they have to be, the manager of their own day in academics, like, you have to do great in school. If you're a junior right now, you better be crushing school, because everybody's in the same boat. And any school, whether it's Harvard or some other place, the excuse of, oh, this was really hard, or, my teacher's not great on Zoom, nobody cares. Nobody's going to have any empathy for you, because we're all in the same boat. And if you're not crushing school, even within bad internet connection, teacher wasn't great when you were in his classroom live, and now he's got to do it over a computer, nobody cares. So you better be crushing school and actually doing it better than everybody else, because that's what an athlete does. An athlete is used to dealing with these obstacles. If you're a true competitor and a true athlete, a true teammate, and a true guy who wants to do great things, this is just enough. This is like a rainy day in the spring, or it's snowing and you have to go to practice. Wishing the snows to stop is not going to stop. Or you just, you know what? I'm going to stretch in the mud, and I'm going to do this drill in the mud, and my hands are cold. An athlete, whether it's a guy who's committed to Harvard or one of our incoming guys, I told them on the Zoom, nobody cares, fellas. Harvard's not going to care. So crush it. Crush school. Crush your preparation. No one's going to care that you didn't have a weight room. So, I don't know, curl that metal chair in your backyard that's part of your patio furniture. I don't care. That's my message to them. The time for being sad is probably past. Get on to the doing. I think there are some college coaches who go out and watch high school games during their spring seasons. I think that's really difficult, because you're focused on your current team, and then you have practice and film and recovery and getting ready for your upcoming games. I know there's some college teams that schedule their practices in the middle of the day so they can go watch high school games in the afternoon. So I don't know how much, from a live viewing standpoint, has affected. And I'm not trying to minimize a high school coach's perspective and the disappointment in their season ending, but I don't know how much is being lost there. I can say that I didn't spend a lot of time watching high school games online. I just, you're so fixated on your own team that there was only so much energy that you had. I think that as far as the reception of emails and things like that, obviously there's a dead period that's been extended, so there's nothing that we can do anyway as far as visits and interactions and hosting campus visits and things like that. So obviously highlight films and all of those things are always valuable. I think that stuff is always going to remain valuable and probably even more valuable now. And it will become even increasingly more valuable if the summer becomes some smaller version of itself. And, so how it's changed, I think it's given all of us a chance to kind of go back and assess, what we saw from last November and the previous summer. Every school has a different mentality around how they look into the future and how they organize the data of how when they go to see people play. Some like to be a year or two ahead. Others are more focused on the 21 class. But I think that's probably mostly what's going on, is going back and looking about what right now. What did you see in November? What emails have you gotten? Communicating with high school coaches and youth coaches to get feedback based on maybe something that you liked on a video. Collecting academic information if you're allowed to based on that age group, and hopefully going into the summer whenever that starts, having feedback from coaches and an assessment from either a live view or a video assessment. I don't. Listen, I make it my business to have a sense of what our competitors' mentality is around recruiting. It doesn't mean it with 100% clarity. At the Division One, select Division One, let's say the 10 or 15 the places that most people want to go. The bigger question is basically looking at, if you're looking at this as a coach, is looking at the number of commits that they have right now in the 21 class and by position. And it would be pretty easy to work backwards from there and say they're probably looking for one more midi, one more attackman, maybe a goalie, right? And so the Division III schools, the selected Division III schools, I think they've worked appropriately aggressive to fight the other select schools for really good players. You look at Tufts and Amherst and programs like that. And WNL and places like that. They were fighting, the top Division I programs for guys. I think there's some percentage of those coaches that like to fill in their spots sooner rather than later. And then there's also families that say, better to take the bird in the hand right now. If I don't have a certainty on the place that I really like to go, I better get a seat at the table. And I never begrudge families and kids who do that. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And I don't think that's unethical. You know what we're at right now, and say, I'm interested in school X and school Y. School X can take me right now, but I really like Y. And you might tell Coach Y that, I'd like to restart this if it doesn't work out, but I have to take this opportunity right now. I don't think that's what's just doing what's best for you and your family. And that could be construed the wrong way by a coach, but he's just doing what's best for him and his family. And I don't think that's ever wrong. I don't know whether I can have a sense of what it means to the 22s until I get an understanding of what it will mean for the 21s. I think the piece of advice that I would give, because it's a piece of advice I'm giving my team, it's a piece of advice I'm giving to our staff, is, the only thing we know right now is that we're all home in some definition of home or another. And, you have your current team that you have, and you have your current players that you have, and how we're talking to them, how we're trying to work on skill development and culture development, and engagement through technology and how they manage each other and how they inspire each other and challenge each other. That's, to be honest with you, that's what I've been focused on. Yes, we are getting emails and we're responding within the framework of what we're allowed to do. If it's a 21, we can do the things that we can do with them. If they're 22s, we can only send a questionnaire and acknowledge the receipt of that questionnaire and have really narrow types of communications with their coaches. And so what this will mean for the 22s, I think, is unclear until we find out what it means for the 21s. And, I think I'm hoping that there'll be some sort of summer events. I think the club teams and the club organizations are trying to figure out what they can do, where they're going to do it, how they're going to modify it. But more importantly, I think your message to your players is do what you can do. All of that stuff is out of your control. Just like for me, the decision within our league is completely independent of me. So what I do control is, working with our staff to get better as coaches and working with our players to get better as people and players. I don't think that's a question that's easy to answer. Each of them have value. The prospect day is typically smaller. It's typically been curated on some level within the NCAA rules. The you're playing in front of, you're going to a school because you're interested in that seeing that school and playing in front of their coaches. And you're playing against a universe of people who have the same feeling. So it tends to bring much more ferocity and competitiveness and pride on some level to perform on a really high level. The prospect days gives you an ability to see a campus and meet the coaches and see facilities and get a sense of the vibe of a place. The tournament gives you typically more games. You're playing with your friends, so you have a sense of whether it's a high school tournament or a club tournament that you're playing, with guys you're used to playing with. So there's pride built into that because you have rivalries with other club teams and scores being kept, and pride and ego are on the line. So that's always really important. You don't typically get the coaching, not the coaching from the club staff. I'm talking about the coaching from in between games and things like that. You're playing 4 or 5 games over a day or two. They tend to blend in together. The tournaments are valuable for the coaches because you can see thousands of kids versus 100 kids. So there's value in the coach. I think when my kids were going through this, my mentality around it, we were living in Indiana at the time, is, we did 3, maybe 4 events when my kids were going through this. I didn't want them to get burnt out. Didn't want them to hate it. I wanted to give them room for them to say, I want to take this week off. I want to see my friends, or I want to work on my game by myself. The summer doesn't always lend itself to breaks and the ability to step back and critique yourself, coming back to what I've talked about a few times, which is becoming a student of your own game, and where you can critique and rip apart your own film and ask yourself, why did I do that? Why did that happen? Was that instinct or impulse or IQ, or why did I let that defenseman do that to me? Or why did that defenseman get away from that? So I think having some breaks is healthy physically. It's healthy for parents financially. I'm pretty damn sure. I know that from personal experience. And it gives you a chance to be the biggest critic of your own game. So I think each of them have value. When I do some of these recruiting presentations, one of the things that I did as a parent was I made a decision on how much I could spend from a budget and a time and a legitimate, commitment level. And then I worked backwards from that. And that allowed me to have conversations with my kids that said, we can't do all of these things. We can only do, because we want to do some stuff as a family, when you do some individual events and some team events. And then it allowed you to create a weekend, a summer that was manageable from a travel and an investment standpoint. So short answer is they both have value, but I think if you work backwards from, what I'm interested in, how much I can do, and what I can invest in, I think you could probably get to an answer pretty easily. Tournaments. I don't know what the summer is going to be. Each state, seems to have a level of independence, through their governor. You're not sure whether they're going to have, people coming in from out of states, whether your campus is going to allow that. We're looking at a variety of potential solutions in the face of maybe Harvard not being open for events. But I think that question is relevant regardless of a pandemic or not, which was, do you go do events on the schools that you're interested in campus, or do you play in tournaments? I think I answered this one last time. I always start with the concept of a budget and work backwards from there. But I think a mixture of the play days or the prospect days that each of maybe the 3 schools you're interested in, most of those are one day and 6 or 7 hours, so you can be in and out to them pretty quickly. And then playing in a couple of tournaments, I think that's a fair trade-off. But I also know that guys that are on club teams are under a lot of pressure to, that you're committed to 6 events and you're a really good player, and they guilt you into going. I just don't think playing the 6 tournaments in the summer is a really healthy thing. It doesn't give you a chance to reflect and recover and study film and study your own game so that you can go to the next tournament and be prepared to try a new move or make some progress relative to something that you're struggling with. So I think a mixture of both of those things is a really smart. I think that's a great question. I think the concept of postgraduate years and transferring for high school guys, postgraduate years, transferring to boarding schools, all of that has been has really blown up in the last 10 years. And I think, and again, for a variety of reasons, somebody trying to hide a bad academic year, or the school that they want to go to doesn't have any room left, or they had something happen in their background that they're trying to put into the rearview mirror. So that I think that had been growing anyway, the number of guys doing that, because there's, the growth in Division I is, has not been tremendous, combined with the growth in maybe the wish list schools has stayed kind of flat. And so there's only so many seats at that table. So if doing an extra year or pushing yourself back for all those reasons I mentioned puts you into a different category, you can totally see why that's happened. But that world is a really demanding academic world, so it's not going to be for everybody. But I do think that depending on the number of people that take their 5th year and the number of seniors that come back, and you can definitely see a spike in people PGing or transferring and repeating years to put themselves in a different class. But not again, much like this 5th year thing, not everybody can afford that. Not everyone loves school. Not everyone wants to go to a place that's really demanding academically, and you have to afford it. And it's those places are not inexpensive. So, but if you ask me, I would say I would see a growth in that. I don't know how many postgraduate schools there are in the country. Let's call it 100. I don't think there's 100, but let's call it 50. Each of those schools only has a finite number of students that they allow to transfer in and allowed to repeat or allowed to PG. So that's really a finite universe of potential candidates for that. But I haven't seen that happen yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if kids transferring to a private school and repeating, or kids transferring or graduating and then doing a postgraduate year at a boarding school. I think that's going to happen. I think that's an unintended, outcome of all of this. There are people who have the means and maybe the strategic vision to do that. But I think that, again, that's a huge. You go from paying, going to your public school where you're paying X amount in taxes, and now you're paying, $40,000 a year to go to a boarding school. I mean, I don't think that's not to be taken lightly in this time. But I think there's going to be an effect of, listen, you'd seen it outside of the pandemic, the growth in interest in the boarding schools. And I listened to it. My children did not repeat. They went to a boarding school, and they had an unbelievable experience. So I'm a fan and an advocate of it. But, a mass exodus to it, I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but I think there's going to be more interest in that. And if you're a boarding school coach, it might be a buyer's market for that. What we look for in defensemen is, the first part that you notice more often than not is how guys move. And, the guy who's freaky athletic, moving left to right and north-south, everybody's going to recognize that guy. We're all going to tilt our head down and we're all going to write, the guy who just covered somebody really well or scooped the ball and ran with it. I tend to value less the guy scooping and running with the ball. You don't get negative points for that, but I want to see guys guard people and I want to see them play off ball. But personally, my philosophy is after I've, watched a guy guard a variety of people and I feel comfortable in how he moves. And one of the things you also try to do is, of the things that you don't like, are they coachable? Or can you coach them out of them? Whether it's a guy who's checking too much, for me, a guy who's checking too much and swinging his stick or getting a lot of penalties or late hits and things like that, are those things that you can kind of coach out of somebody. But after you get a sense of how they move, agility-wise in small space, because there are guys who are freaky fast who aren't great east-west, and it's a conundrum that I think is hard to explain. Then you have guys who are freaky, efficient east-west and small 3- and 5-step movements who, run a 5.1 40, and, that's not very fast. And so, like what you're willing to trade off. I tend to value guys who can guard people in really small space and who make good approaches and who move well enough. If they're freaky athletic and they move in small space and they can run with the ball and scoop with it, you're checking off and you have kind of your own little grading system about all those variables. And then I tend to watch a lot of guys off ball. And if they don't work off ball, I don't write them off. They just might not have been coached to care about that enough. But if they are good, that means they're down the road on some of the things that are really important. And like I said earlier, you're off the ball on defense 80 to 90% of the time. So if a guy is already making that intellectual and mental development and investment because someone told him, his coach told him it was really important, and don't worry about his guy scoring, worry about your defense getting the stop. So I tend to watch that, and I'm listening for communication. And if he's not communicating, I'm listening for him reacting to someone communicating at him. So you get graded on kind of a curve. And so you're looking, there's 5 or 6 variables that I look for in a defenseman and try to give them a grade on all of that. And then talking to their club coaches and their high school coaches and get a sense of their work ethic and their character and their dedication and their sense of teamwork. All those things kind of get folded in together when I'm evaluating defensemen. Oh, you can't have both? That's a great question. I think athleticism is, it's you can change it up to a point. You're blessed or cursed with a certain level of athleticism, and you obviously want to work on your footwork and your endurance and all the things that go into your skill. But I think that's up to a point. IQ is much more of a manageable variable, and learning how to watch film, studying the game, watching a variety of games, playing as much as you can, watching film of yourself in a really self-critical way is a really valuable trait. It's something that we work on with our guys at our place a lot, because every school has limits on the amount of time that you can be with your players, and so you can feed them. You can throw the pole in the water and fish and pull it and feed them, or you can teach them how to fish. I'm a big fan of teaching guys how to fish, meaning how to become students of their own game. So not to make myself irrelevant, but to make them a partner with me in their development. I think that's really critical. Yeah, but you want a little bit of both. If you're a freak athlete and have no IQ or really low IQ, your freak athleticism better be so valuable and not disruptive that we can use you in a really narrow way. Like if you're a guy who just straight run by people but can't shoot and can't roll back, throw back, then let's put you out there, run by someone and throw the ball forward. So skill and IQ can limit you if you can't make good passing decisions or shot decisions. All that athleticism could be a burden instead of a blessing. IQ is much more manipulative. You can manipulate that a little bit more. I think the players from non-traditional areas always had to work harder. I mean, I also got those guys who became really good players. I got Will Corrigan sitting next to me, and my son, that grew up in South Bend, is that you had to kind of put yourself out there. You had to combine being kind of deferential to guys from other maybe more established areas, but while at the same time being kind of ruthless and competitive yourself. I think the loss of the spring season means you have less film. The potential loss of a part of the summer means you have less film, and then let's say the NCAA changes the calendar. I don't think they will, but let's say August becomes a time where events can take place. That's just going to be insanity because all the events that didn't take place are going to try to take place. And then all the schools that are trying to do their events are going to try to do their events. And now you're a consumer and you're a customer or you're a club coach or a high school coach and you're trying to figure out, what do I advise my families and my kids? So yeah, I think it adds a further obstacle for them. There's no doubt about it. I think if some things open up later in the summer, I think having the conversations now, whether it's at the schools that they're interested in and within their parents, like, all right, if something happens, what are the 2 prospect days that you can go to and what are the 2 events you think you can go to? Because if you're a football player, you might be starting football practice, so you're going to have that pressure. But I think having those if-then scenarios now with your guys on your team that have this interest is go through those scenarios, do that modeling now where, hey, we have $2,500 to spend. We can go to these 2-3, fly to these 2 to 3 prospect days and play in these 2 or 3 tournaments. Do you know what tournaments? You got to choose between these 5. What 2 do you want to go to? And then it might becoming more strategic around really demanding of these event operators to say, don't just tell me Joe Schmo from XYZ school is going to be there. How can you prove that to me? Because I can't go to everything, and I want to go there because Joe Schmo is going to be there. I think there's a chance for the guys running events and club teams to really raise their game from a customer service standpoint during this time, because that's how you excel. You do well by doing good. And I think those guys who do that can really do that now at this time.